The story of all empires is a tale of a rise and a fall. Right now, a lot of people are prophesying a fall of the petrodollar. For us, a more immediate question might be what impact the new lack of policy coordination between the West and Saudi Arabia as the leading member in OPEC might have on crypto and Cardano. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss the Biden administration and MBS obviously still being best friends forever, and what OPEC production cuts might mean for crypto and Cardano. Cardano having way more unique wallets staking than Ethereum. The Arbitrum fiasco highlighting just how centralized Ethereum staking and L2s are versus Cardano. And a shocker, a huge surprise from the Dragon. If you feel like the AI is way better at creating a likeness of Biden than of MBS, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. It looks like the Biden administration and Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia, are truly best friends forever, marching together in perfect policy lockstep on all things geopolitics. Said no one ever. The Biden administration and MBS don't seem to get along at all. That's for many reasons, but a lot of them begin with an A and end with assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. The Wikipedia entry for MBS pretty much explains it all. In 2019, during the Trump administration, Joe Biden criticized MBS, describing him as a pariah due to the 2018 killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. As you would imagine, prime ministers don't like to be known as international pariahs. They especially don't like it when a U.S. presidential candidate describes them as an international pariah and then actually becomes the president. In September 2021, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, met with Mohammed. In the meeting, MBS ended up shouting at Sullivan after he raised the killing of Khashoggi. So we could already see back in September 2021, things were going great. And then you can see under MBS's leadership, Saudi Arabia strengthened its relationship with Russia and Vladimir Putin. In 2016, MBS signed an agreement to cooperate with Russia in global oil markets. After Mohammed was accused of murdering Jamal Khashoggi, Putin was one of the few world leaders to embrace MBS. Of course, being in a little bit of a squabble with the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia is not going to win you any favors with OPEC, because OPEC looks like this. You can see here are the OPEC member nations, and Saudi Arabia is by far the largest with an oil production of, looks like 9.3 million barrels per day. The next biggest is the UAE at 3 million barrels. The next biggest, Iraq is actually the next biggest at 4, and then UAE. But you can see everyone else is quite a ways behind Saudi Arabia. They're definitely the leader of OPEC. And then you have OPEC Plus. It's relevant to know what OPEC Plus is. It's a loose grouping of countries, which include Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Brunei, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Mexico, Oman, Russia, South Sudan, and Sudan. It's interesting to note here that when you look at world oil production, the U.S. is actually bigger than both Russia and Saudi Arabia, and Canada is actually bigger than all of the other OPEC countries except for Saudi Arabia. So there is a lot of oil production going on in North America compared to the rest of the world. Having said that, the United States has, in modern times, always looked to its good relationship with Saudi Arabia for some level of policy cooperation when it comes to the global pricing of oil. During the current administration, that hasn't always worked out so well. When the Biden administration was looking for a little help to control energy prices, because of issues related to the war in Ukraine, they went to MBS, and not only did he say no, but we got to see headlines like this. OPEC Plus announces surprise oil output cuts. Of course, the Biden administration was hoping for an increase in oil production, which NBS could make happen as sort of the de facto leader of OPEC. OPEC is supposed to be a cartel where there's not really any defined leadership, but everybody knows Saudi Arabia, as by far the biggest producer, is kind of in charge. And instead of an increase in production, which would make energy more reasonably priced, instead we saw a surprise cut in production. Then we also started seeing some headlines like this one in the Wall Street Journal. Saudi Arabia considers accepting yuan instead of dollars for Chinese oil sales. Talks between Riyadh and Beijing have accelerated as the Saudi unhappiness grows with Washington. Of course, this implicates some ideas around a breakdown in the petrodollar system. Of course, that was more than enough for various parts of the crypto Twitter sphere to declare things like this: the era of the petrodollar is quickly coming to an end. We even saw one American news station running with big graphics like this: the shift from the US dollar, Russia turns to Chinese yuan. Saudi Arabia could do the same. Talks of Saudi Arabia and Iran joining an economic alliance with China and Russia. Very scary stuff. Of course, it makes sense that a certain part of the online crypto world gets a little bit excited when it seems like there might finally be cracks in the foundations of the petrodollar system, because it seems like that part of the crypto world has always had this kind of fantasy that looks a lot like that last scene in the movie Fight Club, where the whole world is kind of burning down. And I think according to, that part of crypto, they might say that the current financial system sort of needs to fail. It needs to burn down in order for crypto to rise to its rightful place. And, they might also say that the petrodollar system coming crashing down would be a significant portion of that. But according to this Barron's article, now is probably not the time that kind of thing could happen. This article is called "The Dollar Rules the Financial Universe. China Can't Change That." And it explains in just a couple paragraphs why the oil-producing Gulf states would not really want to switch from a petrodollar system to a Petroyuan system. And the reasons are pretty practical. This article says China may be Saudi Arabia's biggest customer, but there's no sign that Saudi Arabia will price oil in yuan. It makes no sense on several levels, including that the Saudi rial is pegged to the dollar. When the Federal Reserve changes interest rates, the Saudi Arabia Monetary Authority and several other Middle Eastern countries typically quickly match the move. The Chinese yuan is simply not convertible. It isn't a question of technology, but policy. China's foreign exchange rate is closely managed and purposefully opaque. Its capital markets are developing, but aren't sufficiently transparent. So you don't really want, if you're a nation state whose whole business is exporting a commodity, you don't want that commodity priced in a currency that is based on a completely opaque monetary machine with no transparency. This is the same reason why the demographic holes are a big deal for countries like China and Russia. Just like it's much harder to get people to price their goods in your currency when your system is opaque and has no transparency, it's also much harder to attract immigration to fix those demographic holes when you have an authoritarian system that has no transparency, that operates via opaque mechanisms. People find it much harder to deal with you when you're in that kind of authoritarian system, and they default to the freer systems that are much more transparent, like we see in the West. In short, money and people run toward freedom. So unfortunately, I regret to inform you doomers among us crypto people that 2023 is probably not going to be the year that you get some kind of a seismic upheaval, like a shift from a petrodollar system to some kind of Petroyuan. It looks like that's probably not going to happen for you this year, but that doesn't mean there won't be some impacts from the production cuts by OPEC and the OPEC Plus countries. And this crypto poster went ahead and asked GPT what it thought we might see, both in terms of sort of general economic impacts and crypto impacts. And here are the highlights of what GPT said. higher oil prices, okay, granted, inflationary pressure, impact on consumer spending. Consumers may cut back on discretionary spending, which would slow down economic growth. Pressure on central banks, rising inflation due to higher oil prices might prompt central banks, including the Fed, to further tighten monetary policy to combat inflation. Okay. Stock market reactions. Okay. And geopolitical risk. Further escalation of the Russia-Ukraine conflict or the imposition of additional sanctions on Russia could disrupt oil supplies and exacerbate price increases. Okay. So those are general economic impacts from GPT. As far as crypto impacts, it says, inflation hedge, as higher oil prices contribute to increased inflationary pressure, some investors may turn to cryptocurrencies. Okay, yeah, risk appetite. If higher oil prices lead to stock market volatility, investors may adjust their risk appetite. Depending on market sentiment, cryptocurrencies can be perceived as either a safe haven or a risky asset class. Okay, yeah, they might adjust their risk appetite, but GPT doesn't know if that's good or bad for crypto. Central banks such as the Fed may respond to higher inflation by raising interest rates more aggressively. Okay. Energy consumption and mining costs. Higher oil prices may increase the cost of electricity in some regions, which could affect the profitability of cryptocurrency mining operations. Obviously, very important for Bitcoin. And then we have geopolitical risks. The ongoing conflict, Russia and Ukraine, has potential for further geopolitical risks related to oil-producing countries that could lead to increased market uncertainty. This could drive some investors toward cryptocurrencies as an alternative investment or means of storing value. So, can this guy be a massive thorn in the side of the current administration? Absolutely. Is he going to cause a massive global de-dollarization that will send you directly to the crypto moon Lambo dealership? Probably not. In the world of Cardano proper, we've got more awesome news. As always, here's a post from Charles. Cardano is pretty special. It's almost like a lot of people thought about how to build an excellent staking protocol years ago and made it happen. If you look at this chart, I'm not sure where this came from. I haven't seen a source on this. I'm sure it's accurate if Charles is posting it. But this chart looks like it shows a ridiculous number of Cardano unique wallets participating in staking compared to Ethereum. In Ethereum, this chart only shows about 88,000 unique wallets. In Cardano, we've got 1.2 million wallets participating in staking. That is a gigantic difference. If Ethereum staking is supposed to be the gold standard of staking, like I think a lot of Ethereum maximalists would say it is, then it shouldn't look like this. It should look like the opposite. Ethereum should have 1.2 million unique wallets participating. We should have 88,000. It shouldn't look like this if Ethereum is the gold standard for staking. Also, if Ethereum was the gold standard for decentralization, then I don't think its big L2 scaling solution would look like this. So here's a post that says Arbitrum Foundation made a proposal to allocate 750 million ARB tokens for admin and op costs, but ARB holders voted against it. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, this is decentralized governance. So if the holders voted against it, then certainly it's not going to happen, right? Not the case. Now they said the vote was just a formality and they have already spent 50.5 million of the proposed 750 million ARB. Your vote is not vote. Of course, that's a reference to the famous Do Kwon message, your size is not size, which was universally viewed as very arrogant. And it looks like, here's a screenshot. It looks like this is what the Arbitrum Foundation posted. Where we could have communicated better. We believe that a lot of the negative sentiment around AIP1, I'm guessing that's Arbitrum Improvement Proposal 1, was driven by confusion around the notion of AIP1 being a ratification and not a request. Oh, so your permission wasn't being asked. They were just asking you to ratify it because they were going to do it apparently. They were going to do it anyways, apparently. For those that didn't realize, this was a ratification. They may have been surprised to see that the foundation's tokens have already been separated and begun to be utilized. And then he posts the vote. It looks like 70%, 69.98% of the vote was against. And I guess these are the transactions where they just went ahead and did it anyways, despite the vote. So it looks like there was no decentralization of governance. This was not a decentralized protocol if the people holding the tokens couldn't actually vote. I mean, they could vote, but their vote didn't count, apparently. They were just being asked to ratify it. But if they didn't ratify it, Didn't really matter, apparently. Here's a post related to this Arbitrum scandal that highlights how what they call decentralization in the Ethereum world is very different from what we would call decentralization in the Cardano world. This post says all ETH is staked in protocols controlled by insiders. All activity is on L2s controlled by VCs. What nice decentralized protocols. And then he's going to give you a couple of donut charts here. So this is the Lido allocation. We've talked in the past many times about how much of the Ethereum staking is tied up in Lido staking, liquid staking derivatives. And you can see here, you've got this amount from here to here is nothing but investors, initial developers, founders and employees, validators and signature holders. Only 36.3% left over for the DAO. Doesn't look very decentralized to me. And then if we come over here, he's got another chart for Arbitrum. Here are the ARB token allocations. You've got the team and future team, this giant chunk here. You've got investors, this chunk here. DAOs in the Arbitrum ecosystem, a tiny sliver, individual wallets, and then just 42.8% left over from the DAO treasury. And it sounds like this scandal we're experiencing now is about tokens coming from the DAO treasury. So again, this looks nothing like what we would call decentralization in the Cardano ecosystem. And we're talking about Arbitrum, this giant layer 2 optimistic roll-up scaling solution. So this big scaling solution. Then you've got their big liquid staking solution. It looks like Ethereum in many ways is headed down this road toward a lack of decentralization. Big shocker incoming. I think you're going to be shocked. I was shocked. It turns out the dragon is very much not in favor of Bitcoin and very much in favor of CBDCs. Okay, she doesn't actually want to say CBDCs, but she does talk about CBDCs, basically using other terminology. So she says that Bitcoins, there's just nothing backing them up. It's just all kind of make believe. There's nothing behind the Bitcoin. It's just belief. But she is very cool with other digital assets. Other things she says are actually digital currency. She doesn't want to use the word CBDC. She just talks about other things in the crypto world that are digital assets that are actually currency. And then she says, like those will be backed by banks. And then she kind of looks at the interviewer and he kind of looks at her and she sort of remembers that a bunch of banks just failed. And so she's like, but, and here's where she gets like pretty confusing, like wildly confusing. She's like, but the US government will be backing those banks. And then she looks at the interviewer and he looks back at her and he's sort of like, you can tell he knows that all of those Silicon Valley Bank, here we go, right here. See this look of disbelief. He knows all the Silicon Valley Bank depositors would have been out of luck if Treasury and the FDIC hadn't totally changed their policy where they only would have been insured up to $250,000. And the dragon's kind of looking at him like, hey man, don't you know the talking points? The talking points are Bitcoin is bad, CBDCs are good. She's in disbelief that he's not already on board with the talking points. But I hope you had a great weekend and I'll talk to you tomorrow.